Talk to my deaf daughter. The words cracked through the dining room like a gunshot. Gregory Hawthorne pushed his velvet chair back from the VIP table and rose to his full height, his voice booming beneath the chandeliers of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant. Crystal glasses trembled. Conversation stalled. A string quartet in the corner faltered on a note. He jabbed a manicured finger toward the 16-year-old girl sitting rigidly beside him. "If you can communicate with her," he announced, "I'll give you $50,000 and a letter that gets you hired anywhere respectable in this city." His tone made it clear he wasn't being generous. He was setting up a spectacle. Near the center of the room, a black waitress stood frozen, a tray of crystal flutes balanced in her hands. The golden light of the golden crown caught the edges of the glasses and the sheen of nervous sweat along her wrist. Naomi Carter, 28, had never felt so many eyes on her at once. The golden ceiling gleamed overhead, painted with cherubs and constellations. Gold leaf columns framed the room. At the tables sat the city's untouchables, hedge fund legends, senators, media tycoons. They were used to being entertained. Tonight, apparently, Naomi was the show. Around Gregory, the VIP table smirked and shifted forward. At his left, the Petersons, owners of a multinational logistics empire, watched with lazy amusement. At his right, Senator Harold Kane, famous for law and order speeches that always seemed to target people who looked like Naomi, leaned back and smiled like he already knew the ending. Naomi didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the tray so hard her knuckles went pale. The girl next to Gregory sat trembling. She had soft brown hair clipped back from her face, pale skin that looked like it spent too much time under fluorescent hospital lights rather than sunlight, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Hudson. Her hands flickered in the air, frantic, desperate. "Please stop. Please don't do this." Lila, Naomi thought. That was the name on the reservation. Lila Hawthorne, 16, profoundly deaf since birth. "Come on," Gregory pressed, his voice smooth with cruelty. $50,000. More than you make in a year, I'm sure. All you have to do is prove your little hobby is good for something. He waved at Naomi, as if ASL were a party trick instead of a language. "If you fail," he added, savoring the words, "you admit, in front of everyone here, that this hand-waving nonsense is for people too poor to afford real solutions, and obviously you're fired on the spot." Polite laughter rippled around the table. Not everyone laughed, but no one objected. This was Gregory Hawthorne's world. People survived by staying on his good side. Lila's hands flew again, framing silent words Naomi recognized from a distance. "Stop. Please. Dad, no." Gregory didn't even glance at her. Naomi's pulse hammered in her ears. For 5 years she had served these people, refilling their wine, memorizing their allergies, swallowing their jokes. 5 years of, "Where are you really from?" and "Your hair is so exotic," and "You're so articulate," said like a surprise, like a compliment. 5 years of being spoken around as if she were part of the decor, all while keeping one part of herself folded away like a secret, the part that could read Lila's hands as fluently as any spoken sentence. The tray was starting to tremble. "I accept," Naomi said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The tray no longer shook. The decision, once spoken, settled into her bones like something that had been waiting years to happen. A slow, predatory smile crept across Gregory's face. "Excellent," he said softly. "I do love a bit of entertainment between courses." He sank back into his chair like a king settling onto his throne, fingers brushing the stem of his wine glass, eyes locked on Naomi like she was already defeated. In his mind, this was already over. Naomi set the tray down on a nearby service station with surgical care. She wiped her damp palms on the front of her black apron and walked toward the VIP table, every step echoing in the hush. She could feel the weight of the room. The golden crown had a way of making people feel small. Everything was designed to remind you of your place. The towering ceilings, the gilded frames, the way staff entrances were cleverly hidden so employees could stay out of sight unless needed. Naomi had always known her place here. Tonight, for the first time, she stepped outside it. Lila's eyes followed her approach, wide and wet. Her fingertips fluttered against her own wrist, a tiny self-soothing movement Naomi recognized all too well. Naomi stopped directly in front of her, lowering herself so their eyes were at the same level. Up close, Naomi could see the faint imprint of a cochlear implant behind Lila's ear, the small scar tracing beneath the hairline. She had seen that exact scar before, on another face, in another city, long before she put on an apron in this restaurant. Naomi took a slow breath, letting everything else fall away. The crystal clinking, the smell of butter and truffle, the billionaire's expectant stare. Then she raised her hands. Her fingers moved with a fluid confidence that made Lila's breath catch. "Hello, Lila," Naomi signed with precise, flowing American Sign Language. "My name is Naomi. You are not alone tonight." For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant seemed to stop. Lila went completely still. Then disbelief flared in her eyes, followed by something Naomi recognized. Hope. Pure, fragile, terrified hope. "You sign?" Lila replied, her hands jerking at first, then smoothing out. "Really sign? Not just a few words?" Naomi smiled, and the expression reached her eyes in a way it rarely did on the dining room floor. "Yes," she signed. "I really sign, and I've been wanting to talk to you since the first night you came in." A murmur rolled through the dining room as guests realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't a waitress fumbling through a few memorized gestures. This was a natural conversation, a real conversation. Grammar, facial expressions, nuance. At the VIP table, Gregory's jaw tightened. "These are just basic movements," he muttered to his guests, forcing a chuckle. "Anyone can memorize some gestures. It doesn't prove anything." But there was a tiny tremor at the edge of his smile, like a crack in glass. For 16 years, Gregory Hawthorne had been obsessed with fixing his daughter. He was 52 years old, worth an estimated $3.4 billion, and feared by developers from Boston to Miami. Entire neighborhoods bent around his projects. Mayors took his calls. Journalists wrote glowing profiles about his philanthropic donations, while carefully ignoring the trail of small businesses and displaced families in his wake. He could force cities to change zoning laws. He could make banks bend. What he could not do, what he had never accepted he could not do, was force his daughter's ears to hear. He had spent millions on cochlear implants, experimental therapies, elite clinics in Switzerland. Each new treatment came with glossy brochures promising miracles. Each time when the reality fell short of the fantasy, Gregory didn't adjust his expectations. He adjusted his daughter. No signing in public, he had decreed. No looking disabled. No embarrassing the family. He called it tough love. Lila called it suffocation, but only in her head. There was never anyone to say it to. Until now. Lila's hands flew faster now, overflowing with 10 years of unsaid words. "I love art," she signed. "I paint when he's away. I read under my blankets with a flashlight so he doesn't see. I watch ASL videos online when the house is quiet. He says signing makes us look weak. Is that true?" Naomi's throat tightened. "No," she signed firmly, her face serious. "It makes you look exactly how you are. Strong, intelligent, and capable. Hearing people made that rule, not deaf people. It's a bad rule." Lila blinked hard, like those words hurt and healed at the same time. At the table, Senator Kane leaned closer, eyes narrowed. "Greg," he murmured under his breath, "that girl is not just improvising. Look at the structure. That's fluency." Gregory took a deeper sip of his wine, pretending to be unconcerned. Inside, something ugly twisted. For the first time in as long as she could remember, Lila was laughing. Not out loud, but in the lightness of her gestures, in the way her shoulders relaxed, in the shine that turned her gray eyes silver. She signed about the books she loved, the ASL creators she followed online, the paintings she kept hidden behind her bedroom dresser so her father wouldn't see the deaf girl she had drawn in bold, vivid colors. Everything she had never dared to share with anyone in her father's world spilled out in a torrent. Naomi matched her pace without missing a beat. "Daddy never lets me sign in public," Lila signed, the motion of each word sharp with old hurt. "He says it makes us look weak. He says I must be fixed or hide it." Naomi felt the familiar heat rise in her chest. Rage, compact and precise. She had heard variations of that sentence more times than she could count. She had watched parents drag their deaf children away from interpreters, from community, from comfort. because someone convinced them that shame was more acceptable than difference. Behind them, someone cleared a throat sharply. Enough, Gregory said. He stood again, pushing his chair back with a screech that made several guests flinch. The fragile magic of the moment shattered. That's quite enough of this circus, Lila, he said, switching to his boardroom voice. You have 5 minutes to finish your little chat, and then we're going home. His gaze snapped to Naomi, cold and contemptuous. And you, he said, stop filling my daughter's head with this nonsense about acceptance. She doesn't need people to accept anything. She needs to overcome. That is what separates us from... He flicked his hand vaguely, as if waving away the existence of an entire class of people. Them. The room bristled. Naomi didn't lower her eyes. It would have been easier if she had. It would have been safer. In every handbook, every training, every whispered piece of advice from veteran staff, there was one rule. Never stare a man like Gregory Hawthorne in the eye when he's angry. Tonight, she broke that rule too. She turned to Lila and lifted her hands again, signing deliberately as she spoke aloud for everyone to hear. Tell your father, she voiced, signing each word with crystalline clarity, that the only thing you need to overcome is the shame he feels about who you are. The silence that followed was absolute. Waiters froze mid-step. A fork clinked against a plate and then stopped. Somewhere the quartet stumbled to a full stop on a suspended note. For a moment, Manhattan's wealthiest people watched something they had almost never seen. A black waitress standing eye to eye with a billionaire and refusing to fold. Gregory's face went from pink to a dangerous, mottled red. You, he said quietly, have no idea who you're talking to. He took one step closer, lowering his voice so it carried like a threat. I own this restaurant, he said. I own this building. I own half this block. He jabbed a finger toward the floor. With one phone call, I can make sure you never work in Manhattan again. With two, I can make sure you never work in hospitality anywhere that matters. Around the table, the Petersons shifted uncomfortably. Senator Kane sipped his wine as if taking notes. Naomi's hands were still, but her eyes changed. What Gregory saw there didn't match his expectations. There was fear. She was not made of stone. But beneath it, something steadier. The calm of someone who had stood in worse rooms in front of more dangerous men and walked out. Mr. Hawthorne, she replied, her tone soft but unshaken. You may own a lot of things, but you don't own your daughter's spirit, and you don't own how she gets to communicate. Lila watched, eyes wide, chest rising and falling quickly. She had never seen anyone stand up to her father. Important people, mayors, CEOs, judges, danced around his ego like he was gravity itself. Naomi's refusal to bow felt like someone had cracked open the sky. What Gregory did not know was that every word coming out of his mouth, every threat, every belittling phrase, was fitting neatly into patterns Naomi recognized from case files and training manuals she hadn't opened in years. Patterns of abuse, patterns of discrimination, patterns of power used like a blunt instrument. For 5 years she had listened, filed, remembered. Tonight she was done adding to the file. The manager's voice sliced through the air like a whistle. Naomi, office now! Standing in the arched doorway to the back hallway, Linda Park looked like a painting of customer service gone wrong. Perfect hair, tight bun, smile strained so hard it was almost painful. Naomi exhaled slowly. I'll be right back, she signed to Lila, squeezing her shoulder gently. Don't get fired because of me, Lila signed back, panic flaring in her hands. I'm used to this. It's not worth it. Naomi gave a small, almost sad smile. You'd be surprised what you're worth, she said softly, voicing as she signed. Give me 10 minutes. She followed Linda through the corridor into the staff hallway, where the air smelled like coffee, bleach, and anxiety. The noise of the dining room dimmed behind a thick door, replaced by the hum of refrigerators and the clatter of dishes. In my office, Linda hissed, heels stabbing the tile. The tiny office felt even smaller tonight. A corkboard covered one wall, filled with schedules, reminders, and passive-aggressive notes about phone use. A monitor glowed on the cluttered desk, open to the reservation system. Have you lost your mind? Linda demanded as soon as the door shut. Do you understand who that man is? Yes, Naomi said calmly. I've understood who he is for a long time. You just challenged Gregory Hawthorne in front of Senator Kane, Linda snapped. In front of the Petersons. He could shut us down. He could sue. He could he could ruin my career? Naomi finished, arching an eyebrow. I'm a waitress, Linda. I make less in a year than he spent on the wine tonight. What exactly is he going to take that he hasn't already taken from people like me? Linda opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a fraction of a second, guilt flashed across her face. She had seen things. She had let things slide. It was easier. You will go back out there, she said finally, voice brittle. You will apologize, you will say you overstepped, and you will thank Mr. Hawthorne for his patronage. And if I don't, Naomi asked. Linda swallowed. Then I'll have no choice but to terminate your employment, she said, the corporate script rolling off her tongue. Effective immediately. Naomi's heart thudded heavily in her chest. The last time she had stood in a cramped office being told to apologize to a powerful man or lose everything, she'd made a different choice and paid dearly for it. That was before the accident, before Amaya. The memory rose whether she wanted it or not. A hospital in Detroit, a fluorescent hallway, her younger sister lying in a bed signing, I'm scared, I don't understand. While doctors rushed around her and no one bothered to get an interpreter. Naomi had tried to keep up, to translate, to advocate, but in the critical moment, a decision was made without language. A mistake was made. A life was lost. Later, when she tried to hold the hospital accountable, she had discovered just how much power money could buy. The attorneys they hired made her look like a child. Her credentials, her advocacy, her detailed records, they weren't enough against a system designed to protect itself. She had watched the case die, then watched her career crumble with it. Tonight, looking at Linda, Naomi realized something. She was done surviving inside other people's systems. Give me 10 minutes, Naomi said quietly. If Mr. Hawthorne still wants me fired after that, I won't fight it. Linda stared at her, suspicious. What are you planning? Naomi didn't answer. Instead, she took her phone out of her apron pocket and glanced at the time. 9:17 p.m. Her thumb hovered over a contact she hadn't used in 2 years. Adrian Cole, civil rights attorney, former mentor. The man who had looked at the Detroit case and said, You're right, morally you're right. Legally we're going to need evidence that hurts. Evidence. For 5 years, Naomi had been collecting something else in the Golden Crown. Patterns, comments, names, dates. She had stopped thinking of it as a plan and started thinking of it as a habit. Tonight, for the first time, she wondered if it had been a plan all along. She typed 3 words. It's time. Come. Her finger hesitated for a fraction of a second over the send button. Then she pressed it. The message whooshed away. 10 seconds later, her phone buzzed. On my way. Don't back down. Naomi slipped the phone back into her apron, feeling the shift like a key turning in a lock. She walked out of the cramped office, back through the hallway, toward the hum of conversation and the glitter of chandeliers. Out there, Gregory Hawthorne believed he was about to teach a mouthy waitress her place. What he didn't know was that his cruel little bet had just awakened something that had been quietly, patiently waiting under his nose for 5 years. And on this particular night in Manhattan, in a restaurant built to worship power, a black waitress was about to start rewriting the story of who held it. By the time Naomi stepped back into the dining room, the Golden Crown no longer sounded like a restaurant. It sounded like an arena. The quartet had given up pretending nothing was happening and stopped playing entirely. Servers hovered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to clear plates or just watch. Diners leaned forward over their foie gras and truffle risotto, no longer interested in the food. Every set of eyes tracked Naomi as she crossed the polished floor. At the VIP table, Gregory had expanded his audience. In addition to Senator Kane and the Petersons, 3 other men had arrived from neighboring tables, drawn by the scent of drama like sharks to blood. A venture capitalist whose face Naomi recognized from magazine covers. A media executive who owned half the city's billboards. A hotel magnate whose properties Naomi had once studied in law school. They were all smiling in that same way, indulgent, malicious, entertained. Ah, Gregory announced, raising his voice so it carried. The star of the evening returns. Naomi stopped a few feet from the table, close enough that she could feel Lila's tension without looking directly at her. Mr. Hawthorne, Naomi said, you made a bet with me in front of a room full of witnesses. I spoke to your daughter. I interpreted her signs correctly. She confirmed that. Are you a man who honors his own word? A murmur rippled around them. Gregory's lips twitched. Careful, he warned softly. You're walking a very thin line. Naomi held his gaze. Then let me make things simple, she said. You think people like me are beneath you. That sign language is a sideshow. That your money lets you decide what language is valid and what body is acceptable. So how about we raise the stakes? She turned slightly enough to include the wider table. I'll double your bet, she said, voice cutting clean through the room. You put up $100,000. I'll put up the same. We test in front of everyone here whether sign language is a loser's crutch or a complete language you've refused to learn out of pride. The table fell silent. Then laughter exploded around them. You, Mrs. Peterson managed between gasps. You'll put up $100,000? Oh, this is rich. You don't have $100,000, Gregory said, amused now. You don't have $10,000? You're a waitress. That's true, Naomi replied. I don't, but I know someone who does. And he is very interested in wealthy men who enjoy humiliating disabled children and workers of color. As if the timing had been rehearsed, the double doors at the entrance opened. A man in his mid-40s walked in, not in a tuxedo, but in a dark, perfectly cut suit that looked deceptively simple. He carried no entourage, no fanfare. Just a leather briefcase in one hand and an expression that said he'd spent years in rooms where he wasn't supposed to win and had won anyway. Some guests went back to their plates without a second glance, but not everyone. Senator Kane's smile slipped. The hotel magnate sat up straighter. Even Gregory's hand tightened around his wine glass. Is that? Mrs. Peterson whispered. Yes, her husband replied tightly. That's Adrian Cole. Naomi felt her lungs finally fill all the way. Adrian's eyes found hers first. The edge of his mouth softened. He crossed the room with the measured stride of a man who knew the room had already shifted around him. Naomi, he said warmly as he reached her, using her first name like a small act of defiance in a place where staff wore name tags but were never really seen. You look well. Busy evening, she replied. Thank you for coming. He turned to the table, smile sharpening into something more dangerous. Please forgive the interruption, he said. Adrian Cole. I run a civil rights firm downtown. We handle discrimination, labor abuse, accessibility violations. The unpleasant things certain companies prefer to ignore. Senator Kane's jaw clenched. Gregory forced a polite smile and extended his hand, because men like him always did. Gregory Hawthorne, he said. Hawthorne Holdings. Oh, I know, Adrian replied, shaking his hand once, firmly. You're on the short list of people we assumed we'd meet eventually. The joke landed like a threat. Adrian set his briefcase on an empty chair, flipped the latches, and pulled out a slim tablet and his phone. He opened a voice recorder with a casualness that made the gesture even more pointed and placed the phone face up on the table. Do you mind? He asked pleasantly. I find it helpful to have an accurate record when powerful men start making promises in public. You can't record me without my consent, Gregory snapped. In New York, Adrian said, still pleasant, one-party consent is sufficient, and since the waitress in question is my client and I'm present as her counsel, we're covered. But if it bothers you, you can always choose your words carefully. Laughter burst from a table across the room. It wasn't polite this time. It had teeth. Gregory's eyes flashed, but backing down now would mean losing the audience. And if there was one thing he hated almost as much as feeling powerless, it was losing a crowd. You said something about 100,000? He asked Naomi, as if Adrian were a minor inconvenience. Naomi nodded. You stake 100,000, publicly, she said. I stake 100,000 through Mr. Cole's firm. We test two propositions. First, whether a waitress can communicate fluently with your daughter using that hand-waving nonsense, your words. Second, whether your treatment of employees and your own child would stand up under legal scrutiny if examined by someone who actually understands the law. Gregory laughed, but the sound rang slightly hollow. You think the law will save you? He said. I donate to more judges' charities than you've had hot dinners. Adrian smiled without warmth. Interesting you went straight to judges, he remarked. Most innocent men mention the truth first. Naomi turned back to Lila. The girl was sitting on the edge of her chair, hands clenched in her lap. Are you okay with this? Naomi signed, closing the world down to just the two of them for a moment. We can stop. He can scream and threaten and throw money, and I can still walk out. Lila's throat bobbed. All my life, she signed slowly. Clearly, people have spoken for me without asking. Doctors, teachers, my father, even well-meaning people who pity me. You're the first person who's asked what I want. I don't want to go back to pretending I'm fine. I want him to hear the truth, even if he hates it. Naomi nodded once. Then let's give him the truth, she signed. She straightened and addressed the table. You want a show? She said to Gregory. Let's make it educational. You order your daughter to do something in front of all these people, like you did when you told me to talk to your deaf daughter, and we'll see whose language truly fails. Gregory smirked. Fine, he said. Lila. He rarely signed her name. Tonight he didn't bother. Ask your friend, he scoffed, what her endgame is. She thinks she's a hero because she can sign a few sentences. What does she really want? Money? Attention? A promotion she hasn't earned? Lila didn't look at him. She raised her hands and turned to Naomi. He doesn't understand you've already earned more than he has, she signed. He doesn't understand that respecting people isn't a job title. He wants to know your endgame. Naomi took a breath. My endgame, she signed back, letting her face convey the weight of the answer. To make sure no one loses their sister because a hospital refused to call an interpreter. To make sure no girl grows up thinking her language is shameful. To make sure men like your father learn that power without accountability has an expiration date. Lila's eyes glistened. Tell him that, Naomi said aloud, translating as she signed. Word for word. Lila hesitated, the old fear flickering in her eyes. Then she turned to her father. She had never signed directly to him in public before. Not like this. Not with purpose. Not with witnesses who understood. She lifted her trembling hands. She says, Lila signed, each movement crisp, her chin lifting a fraction as if claiming a space. Her end game is to make sure people with money stop killing people like us without consequences. The table inhaled as one. Several guests who had been half watching now turned fully toward the VIP section. Phones came out, some discreetly, some openly. The Golden Crown's no photos policy dissolved under the heat of something bigger than any rule taped in the hallway. That is enough, Gregory snarled, standing so abruptly his chair toppled backward. A busser scrambled to pick it up. He didn't notice. You are poisoning my child against me, he accused Naomi. You're using her disability as a weapon. You think because you can flap your hands in her direction, you know anything about what it took to raise her? Naomi's voice stayed level. What it took to raise her, she said quietly, is exactly what we're about to talk about. Adrian closed his folder with a soft snap. If Mr. Hawthorne is finished confirming on the record that he views his daughter's deafness as a defect, he said, I believe we can move to the next part of the evening. Gregory sneered. And what part is that, lawyer? He spat. The part where you deliver a stirring speech about equality that no one remembers tomorrow, and I tip the manager to make up for this little inconvenience? Adrian shook his head. No, he said. The part where we stop pretending Naomi is just a waitress you can fire and blackball and start discussing what she's really been doing in this restaurant for the past 5 years. For the first time, something like confusion flickered across Gregory's face. What are you talking about? He demanded. Naomi let the question linger a beat. Then she reached up, untied the knot of her apron, and slipped it over her head. Beneath the black uniform shirt, she wore a simple, sharp-cut blazer. She unbuttoned the top of the shirt and folded the lapels back, and the entire image shifted. The girl who carried trays transformed into something else. Someone else. The way a single change of lighting can transform a stage. My name, she said clearly so everyone could hear, is Naomi Carter. I have a law degree from Howard University and a master's in disability studies. Before I ever picked up a tray in this restaurant, I led advocacy campaigns for accessible healthcare. She paused, letting the words sink in. And for the past 5 years, while you thought I was just your waitress, I have also been working as an investigator, documenting everything you've said and done to create a hostile, discriminatory environment for your employees and your own child. Gregory stared at her as if she'd started speaking an alien language. You're lying, he said. If that were true, I'd have heard your name. I'd have recognized it, Adrian finished. You might, if you paid attention to the attorneys your hospital friends complain about at charity galas. But since flattery interests you more than accountability, allow me to introduce her properly. He stood, gesturing toward Naomi like a co-counsel in court. This is attorney Naomi Carter, he said, barred in New York and Michigan, former fellow at the Center for Deaf Justice, and the woman who has quietly built the most airtight discrimination case I've seen in a decade. Against you. The sound that went through the room was not quite a gasp. It was something heavier. Naomi reached into her blazer and pulled out a slim tablet, the same kind Adrian had set down. She unlocked it with her fingerprint and tapped a folder labeled GC Archive. Rows of files appeared, dates, times, incident tags. For 5 years, she said, her voice calmer than her racing heart, I've recorded, cataloged, and cross-referenced every racist, ableist, and retaliatory practice in this establishment. Wage discrepancies between white and non-white staff with the same positions and tenure. Disciplinary write-ups disproportionately targeting black employees for infractions white staff received warnings for. Comments made in so-called private meetings that violated every policy you pretend to uphold in your glossy HR manuals. She lifted her eyes to Gregory's. And I didn't do it alone. A figure appeared at the edge of the room. Linda Park. Only this time, she wasn't in manager black. She had shed her blazer, revealing a navy shirt beneath with a small embroidered insignia on the chest that very few people in the room recognized. Until 2 men stepped up beside her, wearing similar badges clipped to their belts. The room's air seemed to thicken. Mr. Hawthorne, Linda said, her voice carrying easily, I'm Special Agent Linda Park with the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. This location has been under federal investigation for 3 years. Ms. Carter has been our primary embedded consultant. Gregory's mouth opened and closed like a man who had been slapped underwater. The manager is FBI? Mrs. Peterson whispered, color draining from her face. DOJ, Adrian corrected mildly. Different acronym, similar headache for you. The agents moved with unhurried precision toward the VIP table, flashing badges to anyone in their path. During our investigation, Agent Park continued, we uncovered patterns of racial discrimination in hiring, systemic underpayment of non-white staff, verbal and psychological abuse of employees who requested accommodations, and, most concerning, a coordinated blacklist you helped maintain with other elite establishments to ensure workers who reported abuse could not secure employment elsewhere. She reached into a slim case and withdrew printed emails, sliding them onto the table. Copies of correspondence between you and several business owners present tonight, she said. You refer to certain staff as troublemakers and quota hires gone rogue. You agree to flag them in your internal systems, not for performance, but for daring to complain. Phones rose higher now, no longer discreet. Guests filmed openly, some whispering names as they recognized addresses and companies listed on the pages. Gregory grabbed one of the papers, scanning the lines as if sheer will could change the ink. This is taken out of context, he snapped. This is a witch hunt. You can't. Naomi tapped her tablet again. A recording began to play from her connected Bluetooth speaker, the sound crisp and unforgiving in the high-ceiling room. Obviously, we can't hire any more of them, Gregory's own voice said, rich with impatience. We already have too many black people in the kitchen. The customers are starting to notice. The date stamp glowed in the corner of the screen. 18 months earlier. The meeting title, Management Strategy, Staffing. The guest list, Gregory Hawthorne, Linda Manager Park, 3 department heads. The room froze. That was recorded at your quarterly leadership brunch, Naomi said quietly. The day you told the kitchen staff to stop speaking Spanish anywhere customers might hear them. You recorded me illegally, Gregory choked out, his composure gone. In this state, Adrian said, only one party has to consent to an audio recording. Ms. Carter consented. What's illegal is what you said. Gregory's gaze swung wildly to Linda. Security, he barked. Get these people out of... There is no security coming to save you, Agent Park said. We briefed them before we walked in. Her partner, a tall, broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and a hard jaw, stepped forward. Evan Morales, DOJ Civil Rights, he said. We'll be serving you with a formal notice of investigation escalation after tonight. We recommend you contact counsel who hasn't been on your payroll for the last 20 years. Lila stood slowly. Her father didn't see her at first. He was too busy spinning, looking for the exit, for a friendly face, for someone to restore the script he understood. But the room had changed around him. Those who had once laughed at his jokes now leaned away from him, as if the very proximity were toxic. Lila lifted her hands. Her fingers didn't shake now. All her life, she had been taught to shrink, to apologize for the space her silence took up, to be grateful for the scraps of attention she received. Tonight, with half of Manhattan's elite watching and cell phone lights glinting like stars, she signed the first truly free sentence of her life. I am ashamed to have your name, she signed steadily, looking straight at him. And I am proud, so proud, to know there are people braver than you who see me as whole. Naomi's voice wavered only slightly as she translated. Gregory whirled toward his daughter. Lila, he rasped, you don't understand what they're doing. They're using you. They're... No, she signed sharply, cutting him off with a gesture that felt like a door slamming. You used me. Used my body to prove you were powerful enough to fix what was never broken. Her hands slowed, each sign deliberate, each word a stone dropping into deep water. I am deaf, she signed. I am not broken. I am not your shame, and I will not be part of your cruelty anymore. If silence had weight, the dining room would have collapsed under it. Gregory swayed. For the first time, his power didn't fill the room. It had shrunk down to the size of a single aging man in an expensive suit, staring at a daughter whose respect he had just watched burn to ash. Agent Morales stepped forward, placing a document on the table. Mr. Hawthorne, he said formally, based on preliminary evidence gathered over the last 3 years, the Department of Justice is escalating its investigation into Hawthorne Hospitality and affiliated entities. You are now formally advised that any attempt to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or retaliate against employees will be treated as obstruction. Naomi looked at him one last time. There's something you should know, she said softly, not for humiliation now, but for clarity. For 5 years, you laughed at me underpaying me to refill your glass. You thought I was being obedient. I was watching. I was learning. I was collecting proof. You gave me front row seats to your worst behavior and paid me just enough to keep coming back. Her gaze didn't waver. You thought you were teaching me my place, she finished. You were handing me the tools to dismantle yours. The flashing phone cameras, the stunned whispers, the widening circles of consequence, all of it swirled around the man who had once believed that daring anyone to talk to his deaf daughter was entertainment. Tonight, for the first time, the only voice that mattered in his world was one he could not hear at all. And she had just told him she was done carrying his shame. The Hawthorne story did not end that night. If power were a glass tower, that public confrontation was the first crack. Visible, shocking, but only the beginning of the collapse. The real fall happened in the weeks that followed, when that crack spidered silently through everything Gregory had built. Within 24 hours, the videos were everywhere. Someone had uploaded the confrontation from 3 different angles. The clips of Naomi signing while Adrian spoke about discrimination went viral on TikTok and Instagram. A longer cut, with subtitles and commentary from a popular disability rights account, racked up millions of views in a weekend. The hashtags told the story as clearly as the footage. Talk to my deaf daughter, Joshing sign language, is not a sideshow. Naomi Carter vs. Hawthorne morning shows debated whether Naomi was a hero or reckless. Late-night hosts made jokes about billionaires finally meeting consequences. Legal podcasts dissected the strategic brilliance of working 5 years in a hostile environment while quietly building an airtight case. Inside Hawthorne Holdings, panic reigned. Emails Naomi had archived for years. Messages where Gregory and his executives casually discussed scrubbing certain names from hiring lists or agreed to rotate out staff who made too much noise about discrimination, suddenly pulled triple duty as evidence. Lawyers were called, Then different lawyers were called when the first ones advised cooperation. At first, Gregory tried to play the victim. He called it a smear campaign by radical activists. He gave an interview to a friendly business magazine about how, in this cancel culture, even a lifetime of hard work can be destroyed by one disgruntled employee. Then Agent Park's team unsealed the first set of federal filings. The complaint ran over 100 pages. It wasn't one disgruntled employee. It was dozens of them. Bartenders, servers, line cooks, dishwashers, hostesses, managers. People Naomi had quietly encouraged to document their own experiences. People Agent Park had secretly debriefed between shifts. Patterns emerged. Black staff being told to work in the kitchen out of sight, while white hires with less experience took prime front-of-house roles. Deaf customers being refused pen and paper or written menus because we don't have time for that. Women who complained about harassment quietly losing their best shifts, then their jobs. Every story by itself could have been dismissed as anecdotal. Together, cross-referenced and time-stamped in Naomi's meticulous files, they formed something else, a map of systemic cruelty. Adrian Cole's firm worked in tandem with the DOJ. While the government built its case for civil rights violations, Adrian began filing civil suits. Not one massive class action, but a series of precise, targeted cases that together painted a devastating picture. Wage theft, retaliation, hostile work environment, failure to accommodate. When a particularly damning batch of recordings surfaced, in which Gregory could be heard mocking a dishwasher's accent and telling a manager, if he doesn't like it, he can go back where he came from. Several of Hawthorne's corporate partners abruptly severed ties. Banks reevaluated credit lines. Charities quietly removed Gregory's name from their donor boards. Awards he'd collected over the years for philanthropy and urban revitalization suddenly looked like props in a bad play. All of that would have been satisfying enough if justice were only about the powerful losing money. But behind the headlines, something else was happening. Lila was changing. In the days after that night, she refused to see her father. His lawyers tried to contact her, to craft statements about mutual misunderstanding, but she declined every meeting they requested. Instead, she showed up at Adrian's office with her backpack, a sketchbook, and a handwritten note in careful, slanting letters. I want Naomi as my lawyer. Some people might have seen a conflict of interest. Naomi had been collaborating with the DOJ against Lila's father, after all, but Lila was 17, nearly 18, and old enough to understand one crucial thing. No one had ever defended her like Naomi had. They started small. Naomi arranged interpreters for every appointment. She looped in a specialist in disability family law. She spent hours with Lila, not just discussing legal options, but building a shared language beyond ASL, a language of trust, of jokes, of hard truths gently told. The more Lila signed, the more Naomi understood how deep the damage ran. He told me not to tell anyone I'm deaf online. Lila signed one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Naomi's office couch. He said people would use it against me. He said jobs would disappear if I looked too disabled. Naomi's jaw tightened. What did you want to post about? She signed. Art, Lila replied. Deaf creators. Funny things that happen when hearing people assume I can't read their lips. Sometimes I wanted to ask other deaf teens if they felt like freaks in their own houses. But I never did. I always imagined him reading over my shoulder. Naomi nodded slowly. Then let's start with one post, she signed. Something that's yours. Something that doesn't ask the world for permission. The first video they created together was simple. No music, no fancy edits. Just Lila sitting in front of a blank wall, signing directly to the camera, while Naomi voiced off-screen for hearing viewers. My name is Lila, she signed. I'm deaf. That isn't a tragedy. The tragedy is when people decide my worth based on what my ears do or don't do. The clip went viral within days, not because of Gregory, not because of scandal, but because something in her steady gaze and clear signing spoke to thousands of people who had been taught to treat their own differences as shameful. Comments poured in from deaf teens who recognized themselves, from hearing parents asking how to do better, from teachers, interpreters, nurses. For the first time in her life, Lila saw herself reflected back in ways that were not limited to pity or discomfort. Meanwhile, at the Golden Crown, transformation was underway. Hawthorne's board, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, sold the restaurant to a hospitality group with an actual diversity policy that meant something. The new owners did something Gregory never would have done. They asked Naomi and Agent Park to design an anti-discrimination and accessibility training program using the Golden Crown as a case study in what not to do. A year earlier, Naomi had carried trays through that dining room with her head down. Now she stood at the front of that same room in a tailored Navy suit, addressing a mix of managers and staff from upscale restaurants across the city. Behind her, projected on a massive screen, was a still image frozen from the viral video. Gregory standing, red-faced and shouting, while Naomi signed beside a rigid, terrified Lila. "We are not here to drag one man for sport," Naomi told the room. "We are here because this is what your staff see when they look at you, if you treat them like disposable props in your story." Her hands moved as she spoke, signing for the two deaf-line cooks in the front row. "This," she continued, gesturing to the image, "is what happens when money is used as a shield instead of a tool, when disability is treated as a flaw instead of a culture, when race is used as a sorting mechanism rather than a richness." In one corner of the screen, a small text caption reminded attendees of the number of settlements Hawthorne had been forced to pay. But Naomi's focus wasn't on the numbers. Her focus was on the faces. "I spent 5 years serving tables here," she said. "I recorded 700 plus incidents of discrimination. Do you know what haunts me most? Not the words themselves, not the policies. It's the quiet. How many people in this room knew something was wrong and said nothing because they thought it was the cost of survival?" She let the silence settle. "You cannot call yourself world-class if your staff are afraid to bring their full selves to work," she said finally. "You cannot brag about innovation while telling your deaf customers to just read lips. You cannot hide behind 'we didn't know' when the people you underpay have been screaming in the only language they're allowed to use." After the session, a young hostess approached her with tears in her eyes. "My brother's autistic," she said. "He was denied service at a place like this once. I didn't know how to help him. I do now. Thank you." Naomi smiled, feeling Amaya close beside her, as she often did on days like this. If you're wondering how a woman who was once tossed aside by hospitals and courts ended up training the people who run the city's most exclusive dining rooms, the answer is simple. She refused to let one loss be the end of her story, and she refused to let shame be the last language spoken over her sister's memory. 6 months after the night Gregory Hawthorne dared a waitress to talk to his deaf daughter, he lived in a different world. Gone were the panoramic views of Central Park, the private elevator, the mahogany office with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected his empire back at him like a mirror. He now watched the city through warped glass in a fifth-floor walk-up in Queens, where the radiator clanged at odd hours, and the hallway smelled like fried onions and bleach. On a chipped coffee table in front of him, newspapers were spread like a forensic report on his downfall. Hospitality tycoon faces wave of civil rights, suits former employees, detail years of abuse. Deaf teen daughter distances herself from disgraced father. He kept telling himself he didn't care what they wrote, but his eyes kept returning to one image. Not the now famous shot of himself shouting while Naomi stood between him and Lila. Not the grainy photo of him ducking into a courthouse. This one, a full-color picture of Naomi and Lila standing side by side on the steps of a federal building, signing the same phrase in perfect unison. The caption read, "Attorney Naomi Carter and activist Lila Carter Hawthorne announce new foundation for accessible justice." He crumpled the page before he realized his hands were shaking. Across town in a sunlit conference room at Colin Carter Civil Rights, Naomi clicked through slides on a projector while a team of junior attorneys took notes. On the first slide was their firm's new logo, 2 hands, 1 light, 1 dark, forming the outline of a flame. "The settlement structure is complex," she said, laser pointer circling a figure on the screen. "But the short version is this. A significant portion of Hawthorne's remaining assets are now locked into a charitable vehicle Lila controls, with oversight from an independent board." "You mean he's literally funding the thing he despises most," one associate said quietly. "Access for people he always wanted to keep out." Naomi nodded. There's poetry in that, she agreed. But this isn't about revenge. It's about continuity. 40% of the foundation's annual budget will go to funding interpreters in emergency rooms that currently have no budget for that. Another 20% to grants for deaf students in fields where they're underrepresented. The rest to litigation funds, so the next Naomi doesn't have to work 5 years undercover to be believed. A timid knock sounded at the door. Lila stepped in, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder, hair pulled into a messy bun. The shy, guarded girl from the Golden Crown was gone. In her place stood a young woman who'd learned that her silence could be either a cage or a choice, and she'd chosen. Is this a bad time? She signed. Never, Naomi signed back. To the team, she said, take 5. When you come back, we'll go over the Hospitality Coalition case. The room emptied quickly. Lila dropped into a chair beside Naomi, eyes bright. The board approved the first round of grants. She signed excitedly. The hospital in Detroit, the one you told me about, they're getting funding for a full-time interpreter program. They named the pilot after your sister, the Amaya Initiative. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. For a second, all the composure she'd honed over years of depositions and press conferences cracked, revealing something raw and unguarded. She swallowed hard. She would have liked that, she signed. She would have liked you, she added, a small smile tugging at her lips. Lila's eyes shone. I think about her a lot, she signed. Not in a sad way, in a I'm carrying something forward way. My father spent my whole life trying to erase the parts of me that didn't fit his picture. You turned yours into something permanent. Naomi laughed, the sound drenched in gratitude. He tried to erase you too, she signed. Didn't work. Lila grinned. My followers hit 2 million last night, she signed, a little sheepish. We did a live Q&A about deaf myths. We had hearing parents in the comments asking, is it too late to learn sign language with my kid? I told them no, and I sent them a PDF your team made. I hope that was okay. Okay, Naomi said aloud, eyes wide. Do you know how many policy changes I've seen come from one frustrated parent learning the right words? You're doing more with your phone than some organizations do with full budgets. Pernum. Lila pulled a folded document from her bag and slid it across the table. I went to court this morning, she signed. It's official. Naomi unfolded the paper. It was a court order approving a legal name change. In the box where it once said Lila Hawthorne, a new name sat in crisp black type, Lila Amaya Carter. Naomi stared at it. She looked up, eyes searching Lila's face. Are you sure? She signed slowly. This is huge. Lila nodded, expression steady. He gave me his name like a brand, she signed. You gave me yours like a shelter. I know which one I'm willing to carry into the future. Emotion punched through Naomi's chest so powerfully, she had to close her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she saw 2 lives braided together. The girl in Detroit who had died in a fluorescent-lit room without someone to interpret her fear, and the girl in front of her whose life had veered onto a new path because someone refused to let history repeat itself. Out in Queens, Gregory's phone buzzed on his couch. He ignored most notifications now. They were never good. But this one pushed through with a different tone, a bank alert requiring his attention. He squinted at the screen. Your transfer of $1,000 has been processed to the Amaya Foundation for Deaf Justice. He yelled, hurling the phone against the wall. It bounced, screen spiderwebbing, but the notification remained. Part of his plea deal, negotiated when his attorneys finally convinced him that fighting every charge would likely end in prison, required ongoing contributions to the foundation. Monthly, for 10 years. He was, in a very literal sense, paying for interpreters, legal support, and scholarships that would empower the very communities he had spent a lifetime belittling. There was a bitter irony in that, but only for him. For the people whose lives those funds would touch, there was nothing bitter about it at all. At the Golden Crown, now under new management, a framed photo hung near the host stand. In it, Naomi, Agent Park, and a dozen staff members from various backgrounds smiled under the restaurant's chandeliers. The plaque beneath read, "In honor of the night, a waitress refused to be silent. On certain evenings, tourists came in asking to see the table where it happened." The staff obliged, but with a twist. They didn't just point to a spot and whisper gossip. They told the story the way Naomi had taught them. slowly, clearly, naming the harm and the transformation. This is where a billionaire tried to turn his deaf daughter into a party trick, they'd explain. And this is where a black waitress said no, and years of invisible work finally became visible. If you're waiting for the moment where Gregory redeems himself, where he apologizes in a tearful interview and dedicates his life to good works, you'll be waiting a long time. Some men never learn. Some men die angry, insisting they were victims of a world that stopped letting them hurt people without consequence. But justice isn't about making villains likable. It's about making it harder for them to hurt anyone else. In lectures and podcasts, Naomi sometimes ended with a version of this. People ask me if I did what I did to destroy Gregory Hawthorne, she'd say. The truth is, I did it to build something he couldn't imagine. A world where deaf girls don't have to choose between their language and their families. Where black workers aren't grateful just to be tolerated. Where a waitress can be a lawyer in disguise, and the powerful never know which one they're talking to. In the audience somewhere, there was always someone who sat up straighter at those words. A nurse who'd watched a patient dismissed because of an accent. A young bartender who'd been told to smile more by a boss who thought his hand on her waist was part of the job. A parent whose child had just been diagnosed with a disability and didn't yet know that this could mean entrance into a community, not exile from one. Those were the people Naomi lived for now. Not the men whose empires she'd helped topple, but the ones who would never have to stand in a dining room balancing a tray full of crystal while a billionaire mocked their existence. As for Lila Amaya Carter, she stood on stages of her own, sometimes at schools for the deaf, signing to packed auditoriums about the right to boundaries and pride, sometimes at mixed events where interpreters flanked her and hearing audiences got a taste of what it felt like to look up and realize the world was built for someone else's language. My father once shouted, "Talk to my deaf daughter," like it was a joke, she'd sign, and Naomi, when she was there to voice, would let a thread of steel slide into her tone. He thought my silence made me weak. He thought money would always make his voice louder than mine. She'd let her hands fall still for a moment then, leaving the audience in that suspended quiet. And yet, she'd continue, look around. Whose story did you come here to hear? In a world where arrogance still walks into restaurants and courts and boardrooms, believing it can buy its way out of anything, Naomi and Lila's story carries a simple, unsettling message. You never really know who's serving your table. You never really know which quiet person in the room is quietly, patiently, building the case that will end your impunity. Power without humanity might look invincible. Until the day someone you underestimated looks you in the eye, raises their hands, and starts speaking a language you never bothered to learn. One that doesn't need your permission to be heard. If this story stirred something in you, remember it the next time you're in a restaurant, a hospital, a school, a courtroom. Ask yourself, whose language is missing? Whose silence is being used against them? Because the difference between another Gregory and another Naomi isn't luck. It's whether people like you pay attention and which side you decide to stand on.